By 1888, Nietzsche is no longer building a system, he is dismantling one. Twilight of the Idols is written late in his productive life, in a burst of astonishing intensity. It is short, sharp, and deliberately compressed. Nietzsche calls it a great declaration of war, but not against a nation, not against a class, not even against specific individuals. It is a war against illusions. Everything in this book has the tone of finality. Nietzsche is no longer cautiously arguing. He is striking. He assumes that the reader has already followed his earlier work, the critique of morality, the exposure of resentment, the diagnosis of nihilism. Now he tests the pillars of Western civilization directly. The title itself is revealing. It echoes Wagner's Twilight of the Gods, but Nietzsche replaces gods with idols. Idols are not divine beings. They are human creations treated as sacred. An idol is a belief that no one dares to question. Truth, reason, morality, progress, virtue, compassion. All of these may function as idols if they are treated as self-evident and immune to scrutiny. Nietzsche does not begin by asking whether these beliefs are comforting or socially useful. He asks whether they are true, and more importantly, whether they serve life. The tone is surgical rather than speculative. Aphorisms replace long arguments. Each section delivers a precise blow. This brevity is not simplification, it is concentration. Nietzsche believes that by this point Western culture is already in decline. The old certainties are weakening, but they are still defended out of habit. He intends to accelerate their collapse by exposing their contradictions. Twilight is therefore not merely critique, it is timing. Twilight is the moment when light fades, but darkness has not yet fully arrived. Old forms are still visible, but their authority is dissolving. Nietzsche sees himself as working in this transitional hour. He does not propose a complete new order here. He removes reverence from the old one. He prepares the ground for what he calls a revaluation of values, a project that requires idols to fall first. This is why the book feels merciless. Mercy preserves illusions. Nietzsche intends exposure. Nietzsche's use of the word idol is precise. An idol is not simply a false belief. It is a belief that has been elevated beyond question. It occupies the place once held by gods, not because it is proven, but because it is protected. An idol demands reverence. To challenge it feels improper, dangerous, even immoral. Criticism provokes outrage rather than argument. The idol survives not by strength, but by taboo. This is why Nietzsche focuses on idols rather than errors. Errors can be corrected through evidence. Idols cannot, because they are not maintained by evidence. They are maintained by psychological investment. People need them. An idol provides stability. It offers a framework through which experience can be interpreted. It simplifies complexity. It gives moral orientation. But it also freezes thought. Once a concept becomes sacred, truth, reason, virtue, progress, humanity, it stops being examined. It becomes a premise rather than a conclusion. Entire systems are built on it without ever asking whether it rests on anything solid. Nietzsche's hammer targets precisely this condition. He does not immediately destroy idols, he taps them. If they ring hollow, they collapse on their own. If they are solid, they withstand examination. Most, in his view, are hollow. Idols often originate as useful interpretations. Over time, they harden into dogma. What began as a perspective becomes treated as reality itself. This is particularly true in philosophy and morality. Concepts that once served specific historical needs become universalized and eternalized. The belief that reason must dominate instinct, the belief that moral virtue requires self-denial, the belief that progress is inevitable, the belief that truth is pure and disinterested. These may all function as idols. Nietzsche's concern is not merely intellectual. Idols shape behavior. They determine what people admire, what they condemn, what they aspire to, what they fear. To expose an idol is to destabilize an entire value system. This is why idol breaking provokes resistance. It threatens identity as much as belief. Nietzsche does not apologize for this. If civilization is structured around illusions, then truth will feel destructive. The collapse of idols creates disorientation, but also possibility. Without idols, values must be justified rather than assumed. That is the condition Nietzsche seeks. Nietzsche's attack now becomes startlingly specific. He does not begin with Christianity. He begins with Socrates. For most of Western philosophy, Socrates is the hero of reason, the man who replaced myth with inquiry, prejudice with argument, impulse with reflection. He is celebrated as the founder of rational ethics. Nietzsche calls him a symptom of decline. This is not casual provocation, it is diagnostic. Socrates represents a turning point in Greek culture. Earlier Greek life, especially in its tragic period, affirmed instinct, vitality, and the tension between chaos and order. With Socrates, Nietzsche argues, something new emerges, the belief that reason must rule absolutely. Why would such a belief arise? Nietzsche suggests that it emerges when instinct becomes unreliable. A healthy culture does not need to justify its instincts constantly. It acts with confidence. When a culture begins to distrust instinct, it compensates with rationalization. Socrates, in Nietzsche's reading, is not the cure for decay. He is evidence of it. His insistence that virtue is knowledge, that wrongdoing is ignorance, that reason can solve the problem of life. All of this reflects a profound mistrust of instinct. The body becomes suspect, passion becomes dangerous, rational control becomes the path to safety. Nietzsche goes further. He describes Socrates as physiologically ugly, socially marginal, and psychologically intense, a man who lacked the aristocratic ease of earlier Greek nobility. From this position, Socrates' elevation of reason appears not as discovery, but as strategy. If one cannot compete through strength, beauty, or status, one can redefine excellence as rational superiority. Dialectic becomes a weapon of the weak. Through argument, one can embarrass and destabilize stronger opponents. Reason becomes equalizing. This does not mean Socrates consciously plotted cultural transformation. Nietzsche's claim is structural. The rise of Socratic rationalism corresponds to a weakening of instinctual confidence. When life feels uncertain, people demand proof. When instinct loses authority, reason takes its place. The cost, Nietzsche argues, is a loss of vitality. Life becomes something to justify rather than something to live. Existence becomes a problem to solve rather than a condition to affirm. Socrates, therefore, is not simply a philosopher. He is a turning point, the moment when Western culture began to distrust life in favor of rational control. For Nietzsche, that shift has never fully reversed. If Socrates begins the shift toward rational control, Plato completes it. Plato systematizes the distrust of this world by inventing another one. His theory of forms posits a higher realm, perfect, eternal, unchanging, in contrast to the imperfect, transient world of experience. The physical world becomes a copy, a shadow, a degraded version of true reality. Nietzsche sees this as a catastrophic revaluation. Once a true world is posited, this world automatically becomes inferior. Sensory experience becomes unreliable. The body becomes suspect. Change becomes corruption. Reality itself is downgraded. Plato does not present this as psychological preference. He presents it as metaphysical truth. The philosopher, through reason, ascends beyond appearances to grasp eternal forms. But Nietzsche asks, why should permanence be valued over flux? Why should unity be superior to multiplicity? Why should the visible world be treated as illusion? These are not neutral conclusions. They reflect evaluation, a preference for stability over becoming, certainty over ambiguity, purity over mixture. The true world functions as an escape from the instability of life. Instead of affirming a world of change, struggle, and contradiction, Plato offers a realm where everything is perfect, complete, and immune to decay. The philosopher's task becomes transcendence rather than engagement. This move transforms philosophy permanently. Knowledge is no longer about navigating life, it is about escaping it. The highest truth lies beyond experience. The body becomes a prison. Desire becomes distraction. Nietzsche interprets this not as enlightenment but as exhaustion. When life is experienced as painful or chaotic, the idea of a perfect world beyond becomes seductive. It promises order without risk, purity without struggle, meaning without contingency. Plato's metaphysics therefore prepares the ground for religious transcendence. The true world of forms becomes, in Christianity, the kingdom of heaven. The philosopher's ascent becomes the believer's salvation. The devaluation of this life becomes moral doctrine. Nietzsche famously summarizes this trajectory as, Plato is Christianity for the educated. The invention of a true world allows the real world to be judged, condemned, and ultimately denied. For Nietzsche, this is the beginning of a long hostility toward life itself. Nietzsche's famous formulation is blunt. Christianity is Platonism for the masses. What Plato proposed philosophically, Christianity institutionalized morally. The division between a perfect, true world and a flawed earthly one becomes a religious doctrine, accessible to everyone, not just philosophers. Heaven replaces the realm of forms. Salvation replaces philosophical assent. Sin replaces metaphysical imperfection. The core structure remains the same. This world is not enough. Earthly existence becomes a testing ground rather than a value in itself. Suffering is justified as preparation for reward. Desire is treated with suspicion. The body becomes a site of temptation rather than affirmation. Nietzsche sees this as a massive intensification of life denial. Plato still valued reason as the path upward. Christianity replaces reason with faith and obedience. The emphasis shifts from intellectual transcendence to moral purification. Humility becomes virtue. Pride becomes sin. Submission becomes holiness. What Plato reserved for philosophical elites becomes universal expectation. Christian morality also radicalizes guilt. The individual is not merely mistaken, he is sinful by nature. Redemption requires confession, repentance, and submission to divine authority. This deepens bad conscience dramatically. The believer internalizes surveillance. God sees everything. Nothing can be hidden. Desire itself becomes morally charged. Nietzsche does not deny the psychological power of this system. It provides meaning, community, and moral structure. It comforts the suffering and stabilizes societies. But he insists that it does so by devaluing life. If the highest good lies beyond this world, then this world becomes secondary. Joy becomes suspicious. Strength becomes dangerous. Excellence becomes prideful. The ideal human shifts from creator to sufferer. Nietzsche's critique is not merely theological. It is physiological. A culture that glorifies weakness and mistrusts vitality shapes the kind of human beings it produces. Christianity, in his view, universalizes slave morality. It elevates the values born from resentment into absolute commands. The result is a civilization oriented toward redemption rather than affirmation. Nietzsche now makes one of his most uncompromising claims. Much of traditional morality is anti-nature. By this he does not mean immoral. He means opposed to the basic structure of life. Human beings are organisms driven by instinct, hunger, ambition, sexuality, curiosity, aggression, creativity. These drives are not optional. They are the conditions of vitality. Moral systems that treat instinct as sinful or dangerous therefore place the individual in permanent conflict with himself. Desire becomes temptation, ambition becomes pride, aggression becomes cruelty, pleasure becomes guilt. Instead of organizing drives, morality attempts to suppress them. Nietzsche argues that suppression does not eliminate instinct, it distorts it. Repressed drives reappear in disguised forms: anxiety, resentment, self-punishment, or covert hostility. The individual becomes divided, one part demanding expression, another condemning it. This division weakens the organism. Healthy regulation of instinct is possible. Nietzsche does not advocate chaos. But regulation is not the same as denial. A strong culture shapes instinct into art, law, achievement, and form. An anti-natural morality tries to eradicate instinct altogether. This produces what Nietzsche calls decadence, not moral failure, but declining vitality. The anti-natural moral ideal praises restraint for its own sake. It equates virtue with harmlessness. It treats intensity as dangerous. It seeks safety over strength. Over time, individuals trained under such a system may lose confidence in their own impulses. They rely increasingly on external rules. Spontaneity becomes anxiety-producing. Life becomes something to manage rather than something to express. Nietzsche's alternative is not indulgence, but integration. Drives must be ordered, not demonized. Strength lies in the ability to harness instinct without being enslaved by it. When morality becomes anti-nature, it turns life against itself. Nietzsche now targets what he calls the four great errors, foundational beliefs that structure moral thinking. These errors feel obvious, even intuitive. That is precisely why they are dangerous. First, the error of confusing cause and effect. We tend to believe that virtue produces happiness and vice produces suffering. Good people prosper because they are good. Bad people suffer because they are bad. Nietzsche reverses this. What if happiness and strength produce what we call virtue? What if vitality expresses itself as generosity, courage, discipline, not because morality demands it, but because strength overflows? In this view, morality describes the behavior of the healthy rather than causing it. Weakness, conversely, may produce what we call vice, not because of moral failure, but because diminished vitality expresses itself in destructive ways. Second, the error of false causality. Humans crave simple explanations. We invent causes to make experience intelligible. We attribute events to intentions, punishments, or moral deserts, even when no such structure exists. The world is interpreted as if it were designed to reward and punish. This error sustains belief in moral order. It reassures us that suffering has meaning and that justice ultimately governs reality. Nietzsche sees this as psychological comfort rather than truth. Third, the error of imaginary causes. When people cannot understand why they feel as they do, they invent explanations that fit their moral framework. Illness becomes punishment. Anxiety becomes guilt. Misfortune becomes divine test. Instead of investigating physiological or environmental factors, individuals adopt narratives that preserve moral coherence. These explanations feel meaningful, but they obscure actual causes. Fourth, the error of free will, perhaps the most radical. Nietzsche argues that belief in free will was historically constructed to justify punishment. If individuals are absolutely responsible for their actions, then they can be blamed, judged, and condemned. Free will becomes the foundation of guilt. Nietzsche does not deny agency altogether. He denies the notion of an isolated, self-originating will detached from drives, history, and physiology. Human action emerges from complex conditions, not from a sovereign inner command center. The doctrine of free will, in his view, moralizes behavior by making individuals fully culpable. Together, these four errors create a worldview in which life appears morally ordered and individuals appear morally accountable in an absolute sense. Nietzsche's purpose is not to abolish responsibility. It is to expose the metaphysical assumptions that make guilt and punishment feel inevitable. If these errors collapse, moral certainty collapses with them. Modern societies often imagine themselves as having moved beyond religion, superstition, and archaic morality. Enlightenment, science, and liberal values are taken as evidence of progress. Nietzsche is deeply skeptical. He argues that modernity has not overcome the old moral structure, it has secularized it. God may be declared dead, but the moral categories that depended on God remain intact. Equality, compassion, guilt, universal moral obligation, these continue to function as absolutes, even when their metaphysical foundation has eroded. The structure persists without its justification. This produces a peculiar condition. People believe themselves liberated while still operating within inherited frameworks. Moral language remains intense, but its grounding is unclear. Nietzsche sees this as a stage of nihilism. When the old religious guarantees collapse, values do not immediately disappear. They linger out of habit, but without transcendence they lose coherence. Moral claims become assertions rather than revelations. Modern individuals often respond by doubling down. The absence of divine authority is compensated by moral fervor. Values once rooted in God are reinterpreted as self-evident human truths. For Nietzsche, this is not progress, it is inertia. Science, too, is not immune. While it advances knowledge, it can inherit the moral valuation of truth as supreme without questioning why truth should be valued above all else. The will to truth becomes an unquestioned ideal. Modernity prides itself on rationality, but it rarely subjects its own assumptions to genealogical scrutiny. The belief in inevitable progress is itself an idol. History, Nietzsche argues, does not move in a straight line toward improvement. Civilizations rise, stabilize, decline, and transform. What appears as humanitarian advancement may coincide with loss of vitality, ambition, or creative force. Comfort increases, risk tolerance decreases, security expands, intensity diminishes. Nietzsche does not romanticize past brutality. He questions whether modern stability comes at the cost of greatness. Progress, in his view, is not measured by safety alone. A culture can become more humane and less vital simultaneously. Few values are treated as more unquestionably good than pity. To relieve suffering, to empathize, to feel compassion, these are widely regarded as the highest moral responses. Nietzsche does not deny that suffering exists or that indifference can be cruel. What he questions is the elevation of pity as supreme virtue. His concern is structural. Pity, when institutionalized, can multiply suffering rather than reduce it. It can reinforce weakness by preserving the conditions that produce it. Instead of encouraging transformation, it may encourage identification with suffering itself. The sufferer becomes morally privileged. To question the value of suffering appears heartless. The cycle sustains itself. Nietzsche argues that pity can also be contagious. It draws the strong downward, making them share in paralysis rather than overcoming it. Energy that could create or transform is absorbed into emotional identification. This is not compassion as active aid. It is compassion as passive immersion. In extreme form, pity can become a moral veto. Excellence is restrained so as not to offend. Discipline is softened to avoid discomfort. Truth is muted to protect feelings. The intention may be humane. The effect may be weakening. Nietzsche contrasts pity with respect. Respect acknowledges suffering without dissolving the distinction between individuals. It allows assistance without erasing strength. Pity, by contrast, can flatten difference. There is also a hidden pleasure in pity, the feeling of moral superiority. One who pities occupies a higher position than the one pitied. The relationship subtly reinforces hierarchy, even as it claims equality. Nietzsche sees in the cult of pity a continuation of the ascetic ideal. Suffering becomes meaningful, even valuable. The goal shifts from overcoming suffering to managing it. Again, his point is not cruelty, it is vitality. A culture that treats suffering as sacred may lose the incentive to eliminate its causes. A culture that glorifies vulnerability may hesitate to cultivate strength. Pity can console, but it can also preserve. Against the life-denying tendencies he has been exposing, Nietzsche places something very different: art. For Nietzsche, art is not decoration, it is not mere entertainment. It is one of the highest expressions of vitality because it affirms existence rather than escaping from it. Where religion promises another world, art intensifies this one. Tragic art, in particular, fascinated Nietzsche from his earliest work. Greek tragedy did not deny suffering. It displayed it, openly, powerfully, without moral consolation. Yet the effect was not despair, it was exhilaration. Life, even in its terror, could be affirmed. This affirmation does not depend on perfection. It depends on strength. The artist transforms chaos into form, pain into expression, conflict into beauty. Nothing is denied, everything is transfigured. This is the opposite of the ascetic ideal. The ascetic says, life is flawed, therefore reject it. The artist says, life is flawed, therefore shape it. Art demonstrates that suffering need not lead to nihilism. It can become material for creation. It can deepen experience rather than invalidate it. Nietzsche associates this capacity with what he calls the Dionysian, a state in which individuality loosens and life is experienced as overflowing energy rather than rigid order. Dionysian affirmation does not seek safety. It embraces intensity. Modern culture, in Nietzsche's view, tends toward anesthetic rather than aesthetic solutions. It reduces discomfort instead of transforming it. Entertainment replaces art, distraction replaces creation. When art loses its power to affirm, culture becomes thinner. It becomes oriented toward comfort rather than depth. Nietzsche does not claim that everyone must become an artist. He suggests that artistic creation exemplifies what a life-affirming orientation looks like: engagement with reality rather than withdrawal from it. Art says yes, even to what hurts. This capacity to affirm without illusion is, for Nietzsche, a sign of strength. By this point, Nietzsche's method should be clear. He does not argue in the traditional sense. He does not construct a single grand theory and defend it systematically. Instead, he delivers a series of strikes, brief, targeted, destabilizing. Each strike tests a different idol: Socrates, Plato, Christian morality, modern progress, pity, free will, truth itself. The effect is cumulative. Individually, each critique might seem provocative but manageable. Together, they dismantle the entire framework within which Western thought has operated for centuries. This is the hammer in action. Nietzsche's brevity is strategic. Long arguments invite counter-arguments. Aphorisms disrupt before defenses can fully mobilize. They force the reader to confront rather than gradually acclimate. The reader becomes part of the experiment. If an idol collapses under questioning, it was hollow. If it survives, it gains strength. Nietzsche is willing to risk both outcomes. Importantly, the hammer is not indiscriminate. He does not advocate destroying everything. He insists on testing. What proves life-enhancing should remain. What proves life-denying should fall. This distinguishes his project from nihilism. Nihilism rejects values altogether. Nietzsche seeks revaluation, the creation of new values grounded in affirmation rather than resentment. But new values cannot be built on top of unquestioned assumptions. The ground must be cleared first. Twilight of the Idols performs that clearing. It accelerates the fading of inherited certainties. It removes the aura of inevitability from concepts that once seemed untouchable. It exposes how deeply moral psychology shapes philosophy. The reader is left without easy refuge. That is deliberate. Twilight of the Idols does not end with a new system. It ends with a clearing. Nietzsche's goal is not to replace one set of dogmas with another. He is preparing the conditions for what he calls a revaluation of all values, a project far larger than any single book. Revaluation requires that inherited values lose their automatic authority. As long as concepts like truth, virtue, compassion, and progress remain sacred, new valuations cannot emerge. They would be judged by the old standards. Twilight is the moment when those standards begin to fade. Old idols still stand, but their foundations are cracked. Their inevitability is gone. They are no longer protected by unquestioned reverence. This transitional moment is unstable. Without the old framework, individuals may experience disorientation. The collapse of certainty can produce anxiety, nostalgia, or reaction. Some will cling more tightly to the old values. Others will fall into nihilism, believing that nothing matters. Nietzsche wants neither. He wants the possibility of creation. A culture freed from idols can ask new questions. What enhances life? What strengthens individuals? What cultivates excellence? What produces depth rather than comfort alone? These questions cannot be answered by tradition. They must be answered experimentally. Twilight is therefore not destruction for its own sake. It is preparation. The old gods do not die instantly. They fade. Their authority dissolves before their symbols disappear. People continue invoking them even as belief weakens. Nietzsche sees himself as writing in this twilight, an hour of ambiguity, danger, and possibility. He does not promise that what comes next will be gentle. Creation rarely is, but he insists that clinging to exhausted values is worse. It perpetuates decline while preventing renewal. If the idols fall, something else must eventually rise. That is the task he leaves to the future.